the Loudens had gone back to the United States, married, returned, and there's much more to that story, but it doesn't really fit into our story. But we were seeing, they came back with this clothing, boots and things, so we all looked sort of the same. And people were wondering if, in fact, we were a part of a cult. And
which was half true.
Half true.
Yeah.
It came through really quite quickly through France and Spain. I spent a little bit more time in Spain and Andorra, but then Morocco. And Morocco was really our sort of introduction to what we thought of as the trip. I mean, this is what we really had come for, not so much for Europe. And it was just fascinating. The Berber tribal groups and the people of the Rif, and it was just we really felt that we were in a
this is what we went to see here.
What we went to see.
Yep.
And we came into again Ceuta. It's a Spanish enclave in North Africa, free port. So again, had some work done with the Land Rover, and then traveled along the coast and had some interesting experiences. One was we were down at parked the Land Rover above the dunes and so on, and then went down to the coast, came back. It had been broken into, and we had lost some Levi's and shoes and things of this nature, and realized that it probably was someone who needed a change of clothes, maybe from prison garb or whatever. But it was interesting for us because it seemed so kind of honest that they didn't take all this incredibly expensive equipment that we had,
camera equipment,
cameras,
kind of thing,
and tape recorders and things of this nature. And so we went through here and we found some of the vineyards just encrusted in snails and things. And so it was just that things were different, than one would expect. We got into the mountains above Algiers, and without realizing that there's a Berber counter coup. The region had gone through tremendous upheavals politically and so on, and there were deep tensions between Morocco and Algeria and so on, but then within Algeria itself. And so Ginny and Will had gone off someplace, and Dee and I.
Let me just qualify what we'd done, got up in the mountains to kind of camp for the night. We were going to put our sleeping bags out and camp there. That was the idea. And so then after we stopped, we said, well, let's relax a little bit. So Willard, Virginia went out, and then,
Yeah. And so a vehicle arrives, and these people get out, and they're heavily armed, and they have their bullets and their appearance as rugged tribal people with their shish, their sort of garments that are typical of that area, and as I recall, probably scarred and so, and anyway, they wanted to know with some urgency who we were and why we were there. And
we didn't know who they were or why they were there.
Right.
As far as we knew, they were serious bandits.
Because we knew that there was this counter coup, and we knew that there were shallow graves along the road and this kind of thing. And so they sort of, Will and Ginny came back. I had thinking that it would be wise to make some sort of personal contact with these people, and so I went around and I shook hands with them and so on, and I'm not sure that made any real difference, except there was some personal contact. And so they bundled us up in their vehicle and our vehicle and so on, and they took us down to an abandoned Roman Catholic church yard. And they basically, Dee would know since I didn't speak Arabic, that you'll be safe here. And we still don't know who they were. They think that they were government irregulars or something, but they were concerned about, once they found out who we were, with the incredible ambiguity of that, they just wanted us to be safe.
Yeah, they were genuinely concerned about our welfare up there and said, this is dangerous up here. You really shouldn't camp here. You should camp down in town. And so that's why then they took us downtown. We were just fine with that. One other footnote to that story that was kind of humorous. When they first came up, it was just Jeff and I there, and so they came up and we were the ones talking to them. And so they told us it's dangerous and you should come down there. So okay, we'll go. So, but we needed to find Willard, Virginia and bring him back so we'd all four go down. So I started hollering out, Willard, Jenny. Nothing. Willard, Jenny. Nothing. And the thought that was running through my mind literally was, jeez, here we are. They've been gotten by the bandits that they're talking about. Here we are only 2 weeks into the trip, and we've already lost 2 of the 4 people. And I was really worried about it. And then finally they came tooling back here, and they said, oh yeah, you guys called it? Yeah, come on, we need to get some things going here. And so it turned out to be not scary at all. In fact, it was comforting that they were trying to make sure we were safe. But it really had me worried for a while there, how this trip was getting off, what kind of start this trip was getting off to.
But it also was somewhat significant that we were traveling with a woman, because we were then seen, I think, as being less threatening. And it was...
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. That's probably true.
Yeah.
One other adventure we had was when we were traveling through Morocco, and we were coming up, I think, on the west side of the Atlas Mountains there, and just driving along, trying to explore the mountains, trying to see what was available out there. And as we were coming up, all of a sudden we started hearing what we thought were gunshots. And we paused and looked at each other and said, well, that gunshots? And I said, I think so. Let's stop and listen some more. Listen more. Sure enough, after a little bit, there were some more gunshots. And once again, we said, whoa, we got a battle going on down here. Is there fighting between some of the different political groups or whatever? And we didn't know. And we still didn't know where it was coming from. All we knew is we heard what we were pretty sure was gunshots, lots of them. And so we said, well, let's see if we can inch up to that ridge that's up ahead of us and see if we can see anything on the other end. So we very carefully climbing up to this ridge, drove up close we could and got out, climbed up, looked over. When we looked over the ridge, there was a valley down there. And what we saw, the gunshots were from, was a bunch of fellas, probably, I don't know, a dozen or so men on horses in a big, what looked like a polo field. It wasn't a polo field, but on that scale. And they would all be on their horses at one end with their rifles, start walking their horses slowly. Then at a signal one of them gave, they would start running real fast. The horses start running real fast, and again, and then another signal, they'd hold their guns up and then shoot them off. And then they'd stop real quick. We couldn't quite figure out what they were doing, but that was clearly the origin. So we watched it to 2 or 3 iterations. They went back and repeated this a couple times. And it looked like it was non-dangerous. It wasn't a fight going on. It was something else. Plus, there were a whole lot of things down around them. There were tents and things. There were a lot of people around there, and nobody looked like they were nervous about anything. So we said, okay, why don't we just go down and check it out? So we went down, visited. What it turned out was a periodic Berber fair or an event kind of thing, and everybody come and sold things and bought things and cattle and jams and food stuff and clothing probably and all that stuff. But the side event was this riding of the horses and shooting the guns, a thing which we later learned was called Fantasia. I believe that's the right name for it, right? Fantasia, which just is a sport that they do. We never quite figured out what the point of it was. There was a scoring of it, or you did better with different teams. We didn't never quite learn that. But it was clearly non-dangerous. It was fun, and we had a lot of fun going through the fair and looking what was going on and buying a few things and some foodstuffs for ourselves and so forth. But the first point was we heard a lot of guns, tried to figure it out, found out it was just a very colorful Berber, custom or event kind of thing, as it was.
So we were introduced to the periodical markets that are typical of Morocco. And the markets will move from one city to another or town. And so this was a part of it. So there's a large livestock marketing component to it, foodstuffs, a whole range of goods that were available. And as the scale of these markets is sometimes quite remarkable, and this experience is from later when I lived in Chad, but the markets, we had a similar periodical market, and I'd gone to the prefet, and I was the technical director of the gum arabic monopoly for the Republic, and he said we were always looking for places to recruit gum arabic to come into these centers so we could purchase it. And he said, well, go down to this little village below Abishe, and it will just check it out and see if it fits into your plans. And so I went down to this little market, and this village of like 40 people or something, they were selling Mercedes trucks and buses and all this stuff. And I thought, this is really quite remarkable. And what these markets do, they're you see the official statistics for African countries and a per capita income of maybe $175 for Chad, without understanding anything about the parallel markets and all this other stuff that's going on in the cover of darkness very often. But it's interesting. The economy in Africa isn't what we find in the official statistics. Generally, there is so much going on, and so what Dee and I and Will and Ginny had done was stumble upon a different Africa.
Our first encounter with some of the other thing that was often the case with some of these is that the village where they would go would often take the name of the market, because the market would be on one place at one location on the first day of the week, and a different place second, and it always would rotate around the week there. So the town might be known as the Market El Wahid, the market of the first day, or the market of the second day, or the market of the third day, and that was kind of the name. So people knew when to go there, because that's when the market was going to be there, because it was on a regular cycle. So just a lot of interesting things about these periodic markets, as Jeff described here.
And we had come to Morocco. Will had somewhat different. Will taught archaeology and anthropology at Trinidad State in Colorado, and so he had interest in antiquities and things of this nature. But wildlife filming is something that he was really very much interested in, and so when we think of going to different areas of Africa and Asia and so on, he'd very often have specific things in mind, and one of them was the wildlife of Morocco, and we had a connection through Robert Campbell, our Peace Corps physician, a connection with the National Geographic Society. And so we saw this as a way of subsidizing the trip. That Will would do these films with his Bolex and so on of the wildlife of Morocco. And so we spent a lot of time trying to find Barbary apes and ibex and different animals, and were relatively unsuccessful. And so the cultural part of Morocco became more and more important, and these wonderful old historical cities, Fez and Meknes and Rabat, which of course is the modern capital, but it is an old city, and so the sort of the culture of the area, the urban culture, the rural culture, which is really quite different in Morocco, and it's this contrast between sort of the modernization and then the indigenous society, and the relationship, which is a contrast and conflict in much of Africa. but found that to be quite remarkable. And then in terms of the environmental system, found that to be quite different. We went up to Tiziantichka in the mountains in the high Atlas, and encountered a hailstorm we don't think of as northern Africa in August, and so found the environmental systems to be different from what we'd expected. The complexity of the environmental systems and their the economies that are linked to them, the indigenous societies, and then found these wonderful old cities, Meknes and Fez, and so on, to both be this linkage between the past and the present. And the cities would often have a sort of a new city connected to the old city, and so you could see visually in concrete terms these contrasts between the present and the past.